Great, thanks everybody for joining us. Before we begin, we're just going to acknowledge that we're on the Sinchothan and the Hulkameeting speaking peoples territory where the Southern Gulf Islands exists, and the CRD is working to be increasingly mindful of its commitment to more inclusive governance with our neighbors. So specifically, we acknowledge that our neighboring First Nations include Sakum, Sartlip, Sayout, Pakachin, Malahat, and the Penelakut, and also the unaffiliated First Nations people who live on the Southern Gulf Islands. We're here today to talk about the Capital Regional Districts Initiative to consider establishing a transportation function at the CRD so that we can have better mobility between Galiano, Mayne, the Penders, and Saturna Island. With a new service, the CRD could provide funding for community buses. We could facilitate improvements to active transportation networks or integrate with opportunities for inter-island travel between the islands. So today's video is to help residents understand some of the challenges that have been faced by the island bus projects that have happened on each of the Southern Gulf Islands to one degree or another. And so we have representatives here from each of the islands who can speak to the community bus examples. And before we go to the islanders, we're going to pass it off to Tania Wegwitz to introduce herself.
Sure. Lovely to meet everyone. My name is Tania Wegwitz, and I'm the Transit and Regional Transportation Lead for Watt Consulting Group, and we've been assisting the CRD and the communities on this project, and we work on with smaller communities in coastal BC and elsewhere in Canada. And why don't I pass it first back to Justine? I'm not sure if you introduced yourself fully.
I didn't.
About your role in this project.
Okay, so my name is Justine Starke. I'm the manager of service delivery for the Southern Gulf Islands, and I'm project managing with a whole lot of help from a fabulous team on the Southern Gulf Islands.
And of course, this project wouldn't be anything without local voices and community perspectives. So let's turn it over to Mike Hoebel on Galiano.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Mike Hoebel, and I'm on the board of the Galiano Island Community Transportation Society. And we ran the Galiano Community Bus pilot project from 2017 through 2019. And we operated from spring through summer and fall, but not over the winter in those 3 years. And we did not resume operations in spring of 2020 when the pandemic hit, and we have not operated since for a variety of reasons. Just a little bit about how we operated. Galiano is a long and thin island, as people know. So, and there are actually a couple of natural bus routes, sort of a southern end of the island loop, circular loop between the ferry terminal, commercial areas, and Montague Park, Montague Harbor. So over the course of the pilot project, we met the main ferries on the weekends, and otherwise we operated as an on-demand service. And most of our traffic was this south end loop, although we occasionally were able to run up and down the island. What we learned was that there is considerable ridership demand from visitors coming in at the Sturdy's Bay Ferry Terminal, most wanting to go to Montague and other south end locations. So the great majority of our ridership was actually visitors, and I know this is a little different on the other islands, or summer residents rather than the long-term residents on the island. It was clear that the latter, in order to become regular users, the bus would need to operate year-round on more days of the week with regular runs to the more sparsely populated north end of the island. We also learned that a major source of demand was actually for charter service for large events, weddings in particular. And this was a bit of a godsend for us because the revenue from charters helped to subsidize the regular runs we were attempting to operate. We operated with a combination of mostly volunteer drivers and some paid drivers for the charters. And an ongoing challenge we had was finding enough volunteer drivers with Class 4 licenses to cover even the limited number of runs that we were trying to operate. And another very, very big challenge for us was how to pay for the very costly repairs on our vehicles, which were definitely on the older end of the spectrum. So anyway, just as a wrap up comment, the bottom line is that I think anyway, that a community bus service on Galiano is going to need a significant subsidy to operate. So drivers can be paid, somebody can be paid to help administer the service on a part-time basis. Anyway, vehicles can be maintained and repaired, and regular operating costs for fuel and licensing and insurance can be covered. So I think I'm going to be passing this over now to Paul Brent to tell you something about how Saturna operates.
Hello, thank you very much, Michael. So Saturna is a much smaller island than the other islands in the Southern Gulf Islands, with about 350 permanent residents, but we have a large footprint at about 31 square kilometers. We've been running a pilot shuttle service or bus service since 2014. And we've operated a variety of models. We started off with a 21 passenger bus and found some of the same experiences that Galiano had. It was excellent for large events, but it had its challenges in terms of the cost of operating. So we moved towards a split hybrid fleet with the acquisition of a minivan. And we've operated almost continuously, other than for about 9 months during the peak of the pandemic. We've now moved to a full minivan fleet, which is a couple of minivans that the Lions Club have. One of them was provided through Community Works funds that the CRD arranged, which was excellent. Otherwise, we pretty much funded from community donations. We do not charge for the service. Sometimes riders will provide donations to the Lions Club, but we've been extremely fortunate in having the support of our community. And so we've operated in the black since day one. However, we have the same challenges getting the same number of drivers or getting drivers. And the administration of this is a significant drag. Whether we can continue this in perpetuity is questionable, and certainly we've had to scale our service down in order to meet the financial demands that we have, which is to stay in the black. So some additional funding through grants would be spectacular. Being able to pay, at least on Saturna, the occasional honorarium to a volunteer driver would certainly increase the number of volunteers that we have. So yeah, we have a good service. It's constrained financially. And yeah, we could definitely use some support. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over now to Dave Hargreaves on beautiful Pender Island.
Hi, I'm Dave Hargreaves on Pender Island, and I'm the executive of MAP, which stands for Moving Around Pender. We're a small society that does various transportation initiatives, including car stops, as well as we're trying to develop trails. And we also run the bus pilot project for 3 years. And for the sake of repeating what Michael had said, I can say that Pender, being a bit bigger than Galiano at 3,500 permanent residents, our experience mirrored what Galiano had discovered. All the issues that they were confronted with, we have the same thing. And also what killed our bus, because it's no longer running, was the expenses to keep it running and what I call operating costs. We had to put a new engine in it for $12,000. We had to do the transmission. We had to do tires and so on and so forth. So, you know, I'm constantly reminded of the old adage, like, pay now or you pay later. You can pay now a higher sum to get a new vehicle, or you can pay a lower sum and compromise, but then you gradually pay over time. So it's the capital versus the operating cost. Our experience with volunteers was extremely good. For the first couple of years and into the third year, but it quickly became obvious that it's not sustainable. Once the excitement settles down, we finally realized that, well, we've got to have some sort of remuneration for operators. And that doesn't necessarily always have to mean money. So I think these are the areas that we can be creative. We asked our ridership to give a donation for the rides. We didn't charge for rides. But we found our ridership was primarily for kids, youth, for visitors to the island. I mean, I was a driver, and one day I had a couple that come in from the States. I think they were from Portland, and they were so excited about it, they put $100 in the tip jar, which I think was fantastic because it sort of showed that this has potential far beyond what the standard model of running transit system is. So yeah, we can't survive on public support alone. We have to have grants or public funding, as well as some way to mitigate the expense factor of maintaining. I've long advocated, and Matt too advocates, that our solution is electric bus. They are expensive, but I think, they're going to be dropping in price fairly quickly. Also, a fleet of hybrid vehicles, such as the Chrysler Pacifica or the Nissan Leaf, is probably something we may want to think about. A lower initial cost, but the flexibility of having more than one of them. So that essentially sums up Pender's experience. So I think I can pass it on to Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, you guys have covered everything that we're experiencing as well. Our service has also been volunteer, 100% volunteer from the beginning, and at this point it feels like decades. We are fortunate to also have quite a number of volunteer drivers, such as Saturna and Pender, and we're actually up to about 8 or 9 now. So and we're our only stoppage in time, similar to Saturna, was a brief period of time for COVID, but we are back up and running now, although our numbers are significantly lower than, say, this time last year in terms of riders. I'm not really sure why that is, because we've actually got more people living on the island than we used to. So maybe that's the reason they're living here rather than taking the ferry back and forth as much as they used to. Our main source of income certainly is all the charter events that we do, and without that, like Galiano and I'm sure all the other islands, that funds the service. Ours is also by donation, and we have done that since the beginning. And it's actually quite a good model. But in terms of what everyone else is saying, the sustaining a volunteer service, although we've had 2 of us that have been on the service right from the beginning, and I think we're into 6 or 7 years now, that it really is not sustainable. And yeah, just the general cost of operating and insurance and those types of things are certainly the biggest concern for us going forward. And yeah, that's, I guess, pretty much it. We have all the same issues as everyone, and the only way around it is to somehow, well, is twofold, I believe, and I would agree with using a electric service or electric vehicles in order to keep the cost down, and also some kind of funding, which is always the challenge. So that's my take.
Thanks, Richard. And just to clarify, you're speaking from Mayne Island's experience, right?
Yes, sorry, that's Mayne Island. Yeah.
Thanks. And, you know, as staff supporting the Southern Gulf Islands with the CRD, it's been frustrating for me to not be able to support the community bus and request for operating funding, but the grants that we do have under existing grant programs really only support capital costs. And so ongoing operating funding is not something that we can do. And because we don't have a transportation function established, we haven't also been able to take advantage of federal grant programs that are offering, you know, electric public transit vehicles. There was one just recently that we missed because we don't have the function at CRD to be able to apply for that grant and hold the grant and lease it to a community bus operation because we don't have a service. And so, and one of the goals of this is to establish that function so we can take advantage of third-party grants and also to be able to collect some money to offer the community buses as an operating grants, because it sounds like you're all pretty close to the line and it wouldn't really take that much. Tania, what's your experience working with other communities around BC?
Yeah, a lot of what you've shared is definitely what we see when we look at other communities that are, especially those that are perhaps smaller communities or in more rural settings, and it's always it's somewhat easier to buy a bus, but it's always hard to operate it on a long-term basis. Those ones that can get the different, maybe the higher quality or newer buses or different types of operations such as electric, like you say, they're the ones that do have some level of often local government support, which then can allow for access to those other grants that may be available, or to purchase it in such a way that then you're leasing it over a period of time rather than all in one shot. But really it's the ongoing operating that can be hard. And just want to underline too, you're not looking to set up something like in a large city, right? In all of these places, it's right-sized, different types of service, in some cases on demand, going to where people need to go. In other places, it might be scheduled. But a lot of the time, what works as well is partnerships. And so in addition to kind of thinking about, okay, well, what might be needed to provide just the ongoing funding to make it possible to kind of keep it moving and keep it afloat, it's also then, is there a way that communities and the groups that are operating these services can come together in terms of partnership? So oftentimes in smaller communities, what we're finding is, how do you connect them together? So is there a way as well in terms of sharing resources or sharing knowledge or expertise, or rather than for different groups in this case, perhaps, you know, procuring buses or figuring out some of the operating pieces behind them? Is there also a way through this project to think about, okay, well, how do we sort of convene and come together and help to make it more viable as well as a region, right? And the only other piece I want to touch on is the issue of paid drivers or not paid drivers kind of has come through here. And just like any local economy, right? Transit is about connection. It's allowing people, all facets of your community, whether it be youth or seniors or visitors or seasonal residents, long-term residents, to connect to the community. It's about making local economies happen. And then in turn, if you are providing some ability as well to have some level of employment, that in turn goes back into your communities as well. So we find that contributions towards transportation in turn strengthen communities too.
So just another word about, as we're looking forward, hopefully, to being able to secure some predictable funding for the community bus systems on our islands. I think we also want to remember that we want to keep the community in the community bus system. And there's a lot of volunteer effort that has gone into the pilot projects and getting us to where we are now. And that volunteer interest and involvement isn't going to go away, but it would be so much better supported if we had some a source of secure and predictable funding that would allow us to plan and to manage in a more organized manner. And so we're really hopeful being able to develop a system where there is the funding and there is the ongoing community involvement of the committed volunteers.
And Mike, you brought up a good point, and it's about community involvement. And one thing that we shouldn't forget from our past experience is that when we were all operating community bus services, we at times were able to support other islands when they had high demand scenarios by bringing our vehicles over to another island. And that really showed fabulous community strength amongst the Southern Gulf Islands and was a delight. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's important too that the larger sort of lofty goal of our whole integrated transportation program is to enable an integrated system where you have community bus stops that might meet water taxis at various docks, and that where the buses have the capacity to take bicycles. And we have some planning capacity to plan for active transportation networks across the islands. So I'm really appreciative of all of you coming on and talking about your community bus systems on your islands. And we're just encouraging the general public to get on Bang the Table, fill out a survey, and give feedback into this concept that we're floating about creating an integrated transportation system for the Southern Gulf Islands electoral area. So thanks, everyone. Bye.